So our little session out there was about the need for and sort of strategy about building shared resources that bot developers can use. So we talked a little bit about, I think, two topics primarily. So one being like a collaboratively curated open source set of training data or like utterances. So just things like, 5,000 variations on how to say yes or no, or stop or help. So everybody thinks that that's probably a good idea, either for use in like straightforward pattern matching or training, bootstrapping your training data. And then the other thing was establishing some way of sort of showing people the basic must-haves or like good patterns that your bot should exhibit. So ranging from things like onboarding patterns, like positive onboarding patterns, to things like primitives for collecting certain data types, like a date or a yes/no or a disambiguating input that needs to match a list. So I think the outcome was basically I'm going to create a couple of GitHub repos and like seed it with some stuff, and I will post them in the Botness chat room and various other places, and we'll just get this going. So if anybody knows of these things that already exist, please feel free to share them. And there's some of that stuff that's already built and like hidden away in people's deep dark. 10 years ago they built it and never released it. So now's the time to share that stuff.
So our group focused on personal bots. I will say that it was a bit of a sort of like Wayback Machine moment for me because I worked on the social web like 7 or 8 years ago, and I ended up sort of going through this echolalic moment of just kind of repeating myself. I don't know why. It's sort of like this tick that I have now. And so we talked a lot about kind of, one, what are the use cases for personal bots? When are they useful? When are they valuable? What do you want them to do for you? What type of interaction do you want with your own personal bot? How frequently do you want to talk to your bot? How often do you want to update your bot? Do you want to approve everything that your bot says about you to the world? Should we ingest all of your feeds and just sort of automatically add all of your posts to that bot and then have that bot repeat those things when your friends come and ask it things, etc. Then there are some other questions around what can you do with a bot and how do you personalize the output or the interaction of that bot, or what I might call your personal agent, for you. So we talked a lot about how one of the things that, well, I'll put it this way. If I think back to some of the things that we were working on with a lot of the open social web stuff, and I don't mean open social, but I mean social web that was open stuff back in the day, it was like, how do you, one, advertise the services that you use in the web in a public, machine-readable way? Two, how do you identify or reveal information about yourself? We developed a number of formats for specifying that information. Three, how do you find out where your friends are and where your activities are? We had formats and stuff and specifications for that. The thing that becomes interesting is when you can start to actually do personalized output based on the viewer or accessor of your bot. So if, for example, I access Esther's bot and I'm able to prove to her that it's me, let's say because she gave me an OAuth token, because we just exchange OAuth tokens back and forth all the time, then the bot can actually personalize the information or capabilities that she exposes or shares to me. In other words, if I provide the right token with the right capabilities, I could actually write to her calendar and do certain things. So we sort of talked about a number of things. One, what if we had our own, bot URL, and at the end of that bot URL, I know Amir and I have, again, talked about this a million times, we had sort of a bots.txt or a me.txt or a robots.txt that described yourself. And in that piece of information, you had a bunch of endpoints. Now I'm losing myself. I just lost my train of thought. Hold on, it'll come back. What was I talking about? Nope, okay. About.me and information and accessing it. Oh, right, so the question is, how do you provide this information in like a machine-readable way? Well, one of the things that you can do is you could, one, type in the URL to your personal information, and then the bot that's responding to you can personalize its output to you, right? So here's all the things that I want to use, here's the things that I know. Or let's say we build this little like bot tool, this personal bot tool, it could generate an image that you could share with bots, and those bots would know how to read and ingest the information in that image. Let's say if it's a picture of yourself that has a bunch of QR code-ish stuff around it, like the Facebook QR codes, then that information could actually include information about, for example, where you live. One of the first questions that a lot of bots ask me is like, where are you, what language do you speak? Well, I'd like to be able to take like 40 facts and just give it to these bots. Or I could give it to a personal bot, let's say Esther's bot, and it would suddenly know, oh, this is Chris, oh, you can do these things. So the question is, how do you make that information portable? How do you encode that information, and what do you do with it? And I think that's kind of like where we spun off into oblivion. So that's where we're.
Yeah, so our session was on killer bots. Actually, it was on the killer use cases of bots. Not really apps as an old app. Anyway, so we kind of went around and we discussed and argued about things that were not killer apps, and everybody basically proposed something that they were doing, and that someone else would like shoot it down and say, that's not a killer app, I wouldn't use a bot for that. So that was part of the conversation. I think when we then also made a distinction between bots for fun, entertainment, those kind of things, and then bots for function where you want to get something done. And are these bots attempting to kind of be faster, better, cheaper, basically some good increment on what we have today, or are they kind of 0 to 1 doing something that you couldn't do, would be very hard to do without bots, and now you can do without, with bots. We're trying to make distinctions around that. I think we came up with, well, one thing I think we talked about in the end was that customer success, customer service was probably a very strong entry point now for bots. Basically, I've made a prediction elsewhere that all brands within 5 years are going to have their own bot. And in fact, maybe they'll have many different, depending on function. So I think that's really a very interesting on-ramp, and users are going to expect to get through, basically to talk to, start with bots and then ultimately get through humans. An interesting issue that came up is that if you make it too easy to get to people, then there's, everybody wants to just click right away and get to that person. And then you get the overload that we've had, which is what drove these hierarchical phone trees and sending users away. So I think there's a tension there in terms of the economics. But that was one category. There were people in the group who had Onyx have a little Star Trek communicator, which opens up the power of voice-based group chat to everyone who joins into this thing and has the devices, and then you can have bots basically listening. They made a whole bunch of bots listening in context and then triggering. I think another category of things we talked about was interesting, is basically not the typical, I asked the bot for this and get back some response, but basically proactive bots, bots that are pervasive, bots that are doing things passively and in the background. So examples are the things watching for when there's a discount on your Amazon product that you just bought, and then they'll go and automatically file for a refund. Or things which are basically knowing when's the right time to buy this flight, and they're just watching and it happens. Or I want this kind of an apartment, and it's watching it proactively for you. So thinking outside the bot box. Not something that we're always necessarily having a one-to-one dialogue, but where we set something and then the right actions happen, and then it can take action, not just alerting us, but possibly go through the context. That was the form of things that people were thinking of would be really killer for them. I'd also say we were actually short of just like this wide variety of amazing killer apps, and maybe that's because we only had sort of 8 or 9 people in the group, but there was a lot of interesting ideas and excitement of what bots could do.
Hey, so our group was just mostly me and Greg, and we were talking about Twitter bots, and basically what I learned is that there's a lot of learning that we can do from this history of Twitter bots. And he pointed out a few, which I'll just share. Some of the ones that stood out to me is this one that spits out tweets that are in iambic pentameter and rhyme. One that tweets pairs of anagrams. There was also a sorting hat one, and yes, I'm in Gryffindor. One that mashes up logos, and what he pointed out is like, I think what a lot of people here when they're building their bots are trying to tap into surprise and delight and humor in conversation, and a lot of these people have been building bots on Twitter for a long time that have tapped into these things. So just like thinking about what can be learned from these art projects or fun things that people are building on Twitter. and sweet.
Hey, so we did platform versus startups. It was like a Royal Rumble. No, it was actually really good. So we had 9 startups, and we had, it's pretty surprising actually, we had Twilio, Microsoft, Twitter, Slack, Kik, and IBM all show up, and we asked basically half and half 2 simple questions. So we asked the platform companies, how are you supporting companies and startups building value on your platform? And there's really good stuff over there. You should go check it out. I've just got a quick summary. One is just that they're here, they're showing up, right, which is a big, big deal. There's some notable absences, and I think we should appreciate, the folks that have shown up to work with us here. The second one is that they're actually working together, right? So you've got Microsoft and Kik and Slack and all these companies actually interoperating, which is pretty weird, actually. I mean, it's actually really, really good. It's good for all of us. The tools, I mean, the stuff that they provide for us to build on is a big, big part of it. Although, the early part of the discussion was, well, we give you tools, that's our job, right? And like, we need a lot more than just tools from the platforms. Another good point was they're open sourcing stuff, right? So this is also good. So they're not every platform company is trying to accrue all the value, own it, and monetize it, which I think, we spoke about sort of saying maybe there's broadly some thinking about where we should open source and not. Open roadmaps are good. Not every company is doing it, but every company probably should be doing it, although even that is not sufficient, right? Open enterprise sales support, so actually helping train sales and BD teams about our products and start pushing them. And then surprising amount of the companies actually have funds of relatively large funds. So that was sort of how the platform company said, we're helping you. Evernote, man, where's Phil? I just deleted my whole Evernote. Okay, so then we asked startups, what do you need from the platforms to be successful, move faster? The first one was money, and everyone who's running a fund, also it was kind of like, how do I get that money? I don't think there's ever an easy answer to that, but yeah, this platform companies who have fun should just tell us how we can get it. This one from Peter, it's a little harsh, but it's true, I think. The platforms are being thrown together, and stuff is coming out really, really fast, and there needs to be some more foundational thinking. So some of the stuff that's already been said, what are the specific primitives? And so, we sort of said, this is like the web. Like the web had HTML, and mobile had 20-year-old Objective-C and Java APIs, and we have send-receive APIs, right? So it's a real problem, and just like waiting for that to get fixed. And it came up that we want to influence that, right? We don't want to just wait for platform companies to figure it out. Well, everyone in this room has ideas for primitives. Platforms are shifting under our feet. Just like more stability would be really good. I mean, we understand that things are changing, but we need to know and not just have stuff go down. Official partner programs need to be put in place. So this is a solved problem, right? I mean, we know what partner programs look like from, a million years of enterprise business, like knowing where you are, how to get into the process, where you are in the process, what happens, timelines. We're all running on limited, cash, so we need to be able to move that along. In my notes, these are all caps with 4 exclamation points. Discovery. How do you find bots, right? Monetization. That's 4 exclamation points. How do we influence the design process? Like, how specifically do we get in a room with you? Like, this is all this stuff needs to be process driven. It's like, it's amazing that everyone's here, but like, we need to know how do we push it through. And then lastly, how do we build sort of a sustainable ecosystem? Because of some of the things we said around lack of transparency, lack of ability to influence, we're all kind of building. There's probably a lot of overlap, and like nobody wants to compete with Microsoft or Slack. We want to build value that accrues there. So being more open so that we don't have to do that would be good. But the main consensus was, the last thing is we want help from all the companies that did show up, who after I stopped talking, we have to clap for because they're amazing for being here. Have to guilt all the companies that are not here, which is also on the board. You guys should tweet that directly at the companies that are not here. Facebook, Amazon. Exactly. So that's it. Again, thanks to all the platforms that came and are here.
Thank you. So there were two of us in the brand marketing conversation. We should observe that the valuations of Twitter, Facebook, and Snapchat are largely driven by brands. So brands are other than the VCs, are a great source of money for an ecosystem such as ours. And so I think we collectively need to start thinking about ways to bring them into the conversation because they have no idea what we're talking about half the time. So the kinds of stuff that brands think about are the cost of doing this stuff. The good news is every brand I talk to is very uninterested in doing another app because they understand what it costs to build them and what it costs to market them. So this is a good time to walk in. The time to build it and to build something interesting in terms of a conversation, and what does it take to maintain it. So when you think of brand marketing, you might think of just advertising. I don't think what we're talking about for a while anyway has anything to do with advertising. I think there's a lot of brand things that can happen, and one way to think about it is to think about chat as an alternative to email and social media. So if you're a brand and you would like to talk to your customers on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, the platforms that we're building are a great way to do that. And so I think there's product notifications, there's people with abandoned shopping carts, there's lots and lots of scenarios where people want to track packages. It would be a great UPS or FedEx bot. So that's what we think of. That's what I think of when I think of brand marketing. Maybe marketing is the wrong word, but it's how do I maintain a continuous relationship with a brand? And we happen to be sitting on a most amazing interactive platform to do that, with all these modalities of talking, direct natural language, all the, to buttons, to voice, et cetera, et cetera. So this is potentially a very exciting time for us. And so I think as we're building the railroad, we should think about the true client, which are the thousands and thousands of consumer brands around the world. Thanks.
All right, two more. Anybody else? Monetization, I think there was a group, or not? Yep.
All right, so we talked about monetization, and I think I should note that this was more for brands or for bots that were sort of platforms in their own products and not bots that were built as sort of like an ad. So yeah. I guess there were five ways that we came up with, like traditional app store sort of pay-per install, like the user pays to install the app, but no one really wanted to do that type of thing. Traditional advertising, like after an interaction ends inside of an app, you can show them an ad. There's payment and sort of like a freemium model where you get some stuff for free and you have to pay for other stuff. That seemed to be pretty realistic because everybody wants their bot to have a lot of users, like same as apps. You want a lot of users, so you want to offer it for free, but then you want to make money, so you want to charge them for whatever they're using it for. There's a SaaS model that we kept trying to talk about, but it didn't seem like anybody had any really good ideas there except for the sort of freemium SaaS model. And then there were tools and tech, because we've experienced this and a lot of other people experienced this. People go, oh, you got this cool platform, why don't you just sell that to people so they can make a similar bot, but with their brand. And no one really wanted to do that because we all want to own our own brands and products. And then there was selling data, which apps consume a lot of data, and it seemed like it might be unethical in some situations and maybe against the terms of service. It was actually called monetization and when to do it because Kik noted a problem where they were like, okay, we got bots, we got a bots shop, let's start monetizing this, and they ended up taking a step back because it seemed like bots might not be ready, and so they wanted to get engagement with bots up and get really engaging bots into their store, into their bot shop, and so that's kind of what they're working on now, figuring out what drives engagement before they charge for it. And they also realized this is specific to their user base, but they don't have any money. They're kids, so they introduced Kik points, and they're going to release an API to allow you to consume those Kik points. so that the freemium model could be done with points that kids can actually get for free because other brands have paid to give them to them. So that seems pretty interesting. One thing that we spent a lot of time on that kind of blew all our minds when we realized it was that monetization is platform specific, because different platforms have different ways to monetize. And there's one weird thing that we came across where a certain platform, some platforms charge for integrations. And so if you have more than 10 integrations, then if your enterprise, if your team on Slack has more than 10 integrations, then you have to pay. So then the team goes in and goes, okay, which of these integrations do we not need because we're trying to avoid paying? And it's a weird situation where if you're the 11th one, you might not get added, or if you're the first one, you might get booted. But you're not actually getting a cut of that money, even if they decide to pay for unlimited integrations. So there was a weird thing there. We started talking about all the other platforms that do it. This was very specific to one very specific person in the group. So, but I think that it'll be a symptom everywhere where you can monetize, like the platforms can monetize on the bots, but the bots need to see some of that money, otherwise the bots disappear, and then the platforms don't make any money off of the bots. You know, you see how that works. So kind of those are the two main things that we came up with. It might be too soon to monetize bots. Platforms got to do a lot more learning, and then monetization is platform specific. Thanks.
Hey, we run the metrics, bot metrics talk, I don't know, table. And the questions that were asked were, how do you measure bots? What are the KPIs? How can we measure different bots and different use cases? And like, what are the clicks and views and users of the bots? So the questions, the answers that we came back with is that you can have like aggregate metrics, which don't tell you much, but give you a sense of the scale of the bot, which is pretty good if you're trying to compare different bots and different use cases. But if you're going down inside different bots, you'll start to see that, for example, messages sent is not a really good metric because, for example, one bot can be just listening to the conversation and sending one report a day or a week, and that would be a really useful bot that you can actually pay for, like I know guys at StatsBot do. And another way that can be, it could be a conversational bot that leads you through some kind of a story, and there could be like enormous amount of messages, and but you'll still have to decide, like, is this, like, can you compare those two? So maybe like, and even inside one bot, do you measure like the total number of messages, or are you going to measure average number of messages per user? Because there can be one person who is really engaged in your character bot, who is talking a lot to that bot, and there can be a long tail of people who just message one or two times and never come back. So the actual metrics of users retention are actually similar to the apps. The number of messages you should question on what is the actual use case there. And is it really possible to compare different types of use cases? Like, people were talking about killer use cases of the bots, and is it like, can you compare it to types of bots? I don't think that we should do that. Like, the answer that we came up in our discussion is that, like, you don't count Spotify plays against I don't know, Audible book reads or something, book listens. So there should be aggregate metrics at the top and specific bot metrics for each of these bots individually. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I have no slides. So Chris Messina actually already said, made a lot of the points I was going to make, so I'll try to enhance them in some way. I want to talk about something really exciting. I know it's after 5 o'clock here. I want to talk about lawyers and accountants. There's this concept in the professions of fiduciary responsibility. And what it basically means is that when you work with certain kinds of professionals, they are obligated to represent your interests. And I'm a little bit concerned and a little bit worried as I think about this world that we're all talking about here today, about whose interests the bots are going to be representing. I'll try holding this lower. You know, we use this word agent sometimes intelligent agents is one of the historical terms that bots have emerged from, and an agent is somebody who represents you. I'm an author, I have an agent, he represents me. If he didn't, I wouldn't pay him and I wouldn't use him. When we first imagined bots, way back we had this concept of the intelligent agent that would represent the user, go out onto the net and do things for the user. And what I'm hearing and seeing much more today is a vision of a world where I, the user, remain a human being out on the internet or in digital space, and I am surrounded by this world of bots who are representing all these other larger entities. And I wonder if I'm trying to get, particularly if we're talking about transactions, I'm purchasing something, I'm spending money, or maybe I'm just sharing some information, how I, as an individual, can have my interests represented in a transaction, in an informational relationship. I don't hear a lot of that in the conversation yet here, and I know that probably no one in this room is interested in having this become something that is, in fact, legally regulated. You know, Congress right now is having an argument about the fiduciary responsibility of the people who sell your retirement accounts. You don't want to be in that position 5 years from now after some scandal or some story breaks about bots gone wild, taking money from people that they didn't intend to spend. And so, to avoid that, which I think is a bad outcome for everyone, I think we need to think about what kind of responsibility we have as the creators of this environment to make sure the user's interests are represented. And Chris had some good ideas of ways of starting down that road. Thanks.
Amy Jo Kim? Amy Jo? Oh, maybe. I've got the list here if you're not going to out yourselves. Oh, wait, Ben.
Hello, again. Oh, I love talking into microphones. Can I have Scott's extra 2.5 minutes? Excellent. No, I probably won't need it. So you guys voted me up here to talk about Howdy, and I don't really want to talk about, you guys should use Howdy. So I thought I would talk about some really stupid problems that we created for ourselves. So Howdy is a Slack bot. It lives on your team, and you ask it to ask your peers questions. So one example would be like an agile stand-up. What did you do today? What are your blockers? Whatever. Collects all that information, aggregates it, puts it on a wiki, shares it with a team. That's how it works. So, seemed like a pretty straightforward problem to us when we set out on that path, but we ran into some really crazy problems. So, number one, what happens if 2 project managers schedule a meeting at the same time or schedule a check-in at the same time? It's a fairly difficult problem to solve, right? Because Howdy the bot DMs you when it has a question to ask. So if the bot is trying to DM you at the same time with 2 different questions, what the hell happens? By default, it basically just sends you 2 messages, and now you don't know which question you're answering, and the bot doesn't know which question you're answering, and there's no straightforward or obvious way around that. So we actually had to build like a crazy queuing system and like cron job system so that it could like not buffer that question for later, but then when do you pick up later? And like, is your project manager going to wait around for you to answer those questions like later, or maybe you don't have time to do 2 back to back? No good solution. It's actually a shit show. Another one is multi-line input. So sometimes the answer to what are you working on today requires you to say more than one small string. And actually what we found very quickly was that people would be like, it would say like, hey Ben, what did you work on today? And the person would be like, enter. And now they're on to the next question. So we want to do this in a graceful way. So like, how can you collect several lines of input and then move on to the next question without having like an awkward like say done when you're done? Like, do you wait 30 seconds and there's no typing, so you move on? Like, not a straightforward thing. I have no solution to that problem at all. Time zones. Time zones are difficult to deal with anyways, but so one of the key functions of Howdy would be scheduling these things, right? Like 9 a.m. every day, the check-in happens. Well, teams on Slack are distributed, and they're not just distributed around like Austin. They're distributed like, it's half the teams in India, half the teams in San Francisco. So what does it mean to schedule a 9 a.m. meeting? And we thought this was a fairly straightforward question. Like at 9 a.m. In the time zone at which the project manager scheduled it. But that turned out to not be what anybody wanted. They actually wanted to run in 9 a.m. in local time, wherever those people are, and aggregate all of those responses over like a 24-hour period into one final document. How the hell am I supposed to do that? I mean, like a lot more complicated than we thought. And then another sort of similar one is like, is the person at work today? Like, should I wait for this person to answer before I move on to the other people or like finish the job? Like, so you'd think that this would be an obvious, like something that's supported in Slack already, right? Like, there's an away mode, you could be offline. There's all these various signals and settings that you can have in Slack, but none of them actually explicitly mean I'm away. So we were, again, we thought we were being really clever. We're just like, if the person is marked as away, we just won't send them any messages. And when they come online, we'll like say, hey, you missed some stuff while you were away. We launched this thing, and like immediately people started yelling at us because for a variety of reasons, right? Project managers were using Howdy to bring people online, to get them to come online and answer the questions. Other people set themselves away so that their peers won't bother them, or just as a social indicator, but that doesn't actually mean they're away. And then like, what if you're sick or on vacation? Like, there's not an actual way to say like, hey Slack, I'm on vacation for a week and I'll be back in 7 days, and then you can send me messages. So really challenging problems to deal with from an application standpoint. Yeah, that's it.
All right, Poncho.
I'm going to try to do a computer. We'll see if this works. All right. see if I can get this screen fixed up. There we go. I think that's a lot better. So how many of you do not know what Poncho is? Okay. We will solve this one very quickly, very easily. Poncho is a weather cat. It tells you the weather. Pretty simple. It is not a fox, contrary to what a lot of people ask. We have a lot of people actually ask, is Poncho a fox? Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, we just launched at Facebook Developer Conference F8 back in April. We've been doing the bot thing for about 2 months now. Let me turn that off. If I can, I guess I can. We had basically 1 month to launch this. Facebook came to us and said, hey, we think Poncho's great. You guys have been doing really interesting stuff with SMS, with email, and with your iOS app. We want you to do something on Facebook Messenger. We had 1 month to figure this out. It was a big what the fuck for us. At the same time, we saw what was happening with Tay, Xiao Ice, and some of these other bots. And we knew that we needed to do something different. We wanted to be fun. We didn't want to get caught up in the bad feedback cycles that happened with Tay. So for us, one of the biggest concerns that we had was negative feedback, negative criticism, and how to deal with that. One of the big things with Tay was the screenshots that actually happen. I mean, I'm not going to pull up any of those, but it was something that we were worried about. We did not want people taking screenshots of Poncho saying something bad, something terrible. We wanted to keep it PC enough, but also be friendly enough. So one of the things that we actually did was we built an entire content management system using ReefScript, which is very similar to Rob's Superscript, to allow our editors to go in and actually write out a bunch of different keywords, phrases, arrays of things, and be able to match on that. So this one, for instance, is a conversation flow for how to deal with banned words. We don't want people coming in and saying a lot of nasty stuff. So let's say we're talking to Poncho bot and we say the word fuck. Poncho says, hey, that's rude. It'll call you out. The trick, though, here is with sorry, if you say sorry, it'll be like, okay, I forgive you. But if you say whatever, we actually ignore you for a couple minutes because we don't want you to continue trying to harass the bot, trolling us, whatever else. So I'll come in here and I'll just say sorry. And Poncho forgives us. But, we can't do everything right. People are going to complain. People are going to find problems with us. So, for instance, this person tried to talk to the bot, got a little bit carried away, decided to, be like, hey, you keep on talking to us, typing to us. That happens. But at the end of the day, though, we are a weather bot. We're trying to do interesting things. Let's see. No, not that one. Oh, yeah. So, for instance, there's a lot of people that, understand teen lingo. They understand things like BB, LMAO, LOL. But there's a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of actually old adults also using this. We're finding that to be a fun challenge to do is how do we respond back using normal language, but also be able to feel fun and playful with our language. Yeah, that's about it. I'm a little scatterbrained today, so I apologize if that was a big whatever. But yeah, if you guys haven't talked to Poncho, you guys should. You should ask it the weather. You should talk to it. We have a lot of different conversation flows, so you guys can say, hey, Poncho, hey, I love you, or whatever else. So, even something as simple as sending a like and being able to respond back. And if you guys ever have any questions, you can just hit me up, G Leuch. You guys can find me on the invite list for Botness. Happy to talk to you guys more about this.
All right. Is the Kik conversation designer who looked very confused still here? But willing to give it a go? All right. That's the spirit.
So my name is Ali. I work at Kik as a conversational designer. I started off in computational linguistics. However, the issue with this topic is that it's fucking broad. So are there any specific topics or specific types of bot interactions that you guys are fascinated with? Like anything from health, education, gaming? Okay. So how do we avoid reinventing the wheel? Is that concise enough? Around conversation. So when I first started at Kik, essentially we started looking at user inputs in order to create an AI that would allow us to classify all of this information into relevant fields and answer them properly. Now that was obviously a reinvention of the wheel, naturally, but in order to avoid doing this, and we are in a stage of tremendous collaboration, which is something that I've noticed here. A lot of the studies and a lot of the learnings that we're having should be shared. So that would be one way of avoiding that. Does that adequately answer your question? Yeah.
There's companies out there that have been building all the crappy stuff that I talked about for years. Most of them have computational
Sure.
background.
Yeah.
What should these guys, talent-wise, what should these guys be looking for? Those guys all know how to build.
Right. Well, now that since so many of the platforms that are available to create bots exist, I would stress, in my experience, finding good creatives. Now, these are creatives that aren't necessarily limited to just writing stories, but find people that are good with improv, find people that are good with script writing, and ensure that all the conversations that you are creating have the user in mind. So yeah, that would be the ultimate conclusion: is find great writers, find writers that really and truly give a shit about your audience. So yeah, does that answer it? A little bit?
And I think we need to switch to the next person.
Absolutely.
All right. Esther.
Okay, so I didn't realize I was getting up again, but I was pinged a few minutes ago to tell me apparently I was voted in or something. Exciting. So I guess I'll just kind of talk a little bit about what happened with EstherBot, why I built it, some of the things I learned, and go from there. So I built EstherBot. The startup I was working at, so I'm a product marketer. The startup I was working at was about to go out of business. We weren't able to secure funding for the next round. I'd been really interested in trying to build a bot, and I had been playing around with different frameworks, and I was trying to figure out what's an interesting use case, one that's not necessarily business-oriented, but that's more consumer-friendly, something that just kind of like everybody could relate to. And I felt like, well, a resume bot makes a lot of sense. And also, I'm going to be looking for a new job pretty soon, so timing. So I built EstherBot on top of Smooch. I ended up open sourcing the code, and it was pretty cool. Almost 700 people have since forked it, and I've seen dozens of variations of people creating their own. So a couple of the things that I took out of that experience, constructing conversation flows is pretty tough, and people love personality, like GIFs and emoji and stickers, and I would see that because my initial bot was so basic, it couldn't really respond to those things. It'd just give you like the same answer and over again. People would just be like, oh, terrible. So then I implemented the action buttons, and I went from getting an average of 8 responses, go between back and forth, and that went up to over 20. And so I saw buttons work just from like a really practical numbers standpoint. People stay engaged a lot longer. And also like the feedback I was getting was more positive. I put it on Facebook, SMS, and Telegram, and I did a series of like posts about it, and I got some press. And everyone landed on the same landing page where those 3 options were available. And it broke down to over 90% of people chose Messenger when given those 3 options. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And so I decided to go all in on building on Messenger for the V2, which you saw earlier today. Let's see. there were definitely a lot of people going off the rail and just trying to test it. Some of those conversations were interesting to see. I found scaling conversations is really challenging. Granted, it was just me behind the bot. So when there were dozens of people interacting with it in a day, it was challenging for me to then jump in. And there was a connect with me option. And so people had an expectation of an immediate answer. And so having some kind of guardrail there with here are the times or whatnot is what really motivated me to add that feature in Chris's. And just from like some random statistics standpoint, I ended up getting I got 8 interviews and 3 actual offers from jobs like Intercom, Smooch, a couple other companies, directly from the bot, like what I built and them interacting with it. And so, yeah, I think that it proved that it's a use case that's actually viable, and there's something interesting here. So that's it.
Thank you, Esther. All right. Allison, our closeout talk for the day. And then we're going to be heading to Waxman's.
Hey guys, my name's Allison Behringer, and I host and produce a narrative documentary style podcast called The Intern, and I work out of Betaworks. Brady tagged me to talk, and so just wanted to share a little bit about what I do. So I do not have a tech background at all. I used to be a teacher, work in the nonprofit space, so when I was hired to make a podcast about what it's like to work in tech and live in New York City, it was kind of my first introduction to everything. So I kind of operate as like an insider, outsider to this world. And so kind of 2 like really quick stories about that. When I first sat down in the morning and everyone was introducing themselves, I was kind of taking notes on who I wanted to talk to and just like kind of like what they looked like or what they were wearing. And I looked at my list and realized it was like, this person, their name, why I wanted to talk to them, and like blue plaid shirt. And then it was like pink plaid shirt, and like light blue plaid shirt. And then the other thing is that, so I watched Silicon Valley for the first time like years ago, and I didn't get it at all. Like I didn't understand why it was funny. And then it came on after Game of Thrones the other week, and I started watching it again like for the second time, and I was like, this is hilarious. I totally get that. So at that moment I was kind of like, all right, I think I'm kind of stepping in a little bit more to the insider side of things. So like in each episode, I kind of ask a bigger question about the tech world and then kind of try to see it through the lens of my own experience. So like one of the first episodes, I asked the question, where does all this money come from? Like, why is it that I'm eating Kind bars and like stashing 5 in my backpack every day, and we're all drinking free beer and none of these companies are making any money? And like, I get it, but like really, like where does that money come from? And like, okay, it comes from the VCs, but where does that money come from? So I kind of bring like a healthy dose of skepticism, I think, to things, and also just make it relatable as someone coming from the outside looking in. I think one of the best episodes, I documented my experience asking for a raise. So that's episode 5, if you want to check it out. And so with that in mind, like the outsider perspective, I thought I'd just share some questions that I have coming into the Botness space. Okay, so one thing I've noticed is that companies in Betaworks and in the space suddenly started incorporating bot strategies into their companies. And my question is, like, this was touched on earlier, but in some ways it is fueled by venture capital money, but like to what extent? And how does that all work? Why is the bots topic so polarizing? Why are some people so staunchly opposed to this new thing and some people are so behind it? How is this different than Smarter Child, which I talked to in middle school on AIM? Like what is new? What is new here? And how are bots going to monetize, and why do people scoff when I ask this question? And also, like, what's with all the jargon? I'm really interested in like how ideas come to be and how trends become something that we're all going to jump on this train and get behind. How did the word bot come about? And we had a really interesting conversation about that. So that's pretty much it. It's really interesting being here with you guys. And yeah, if you want to download the podcast, you can get it iTunes, Overcast, SoundCloud. It's called The Intern. Thanks.